Pops, and yes, I'm walking through Trek, the original series. This episode is called The Naked Time. And on the surface, I didn't remember the episode. And then when I saw Sulu with a sword, I remembered this episode. And I've definitely seen memes of this episode. I've seen this episode being mocked. And yet at the same time, I have to be honest, the episode was a lot better than I would have thought it was for being mocked so regularly by the regular society and stuff. Because the episode is actually interesting in just little small ways. Like I don't know that I cared too much about the ultimate like metaphor, what they're going for, but the fact that the execution and stuff I actually thought was pretty clever for its time. And you basically have the crew exploring an ice planet that's ready to sort of like self-destruct. I'm not sure I totally understood what they were going for with what the problem is on the planet, but planet Psi 2000, which is basically Hoth before there was Hoth. They find a strangled woman, and Spock and some other random extra named Joe is running around in their little Dr. No suits. And there's like this red liquid effect, which I gotta be honest was pretty clever because what they did was come up with a reason to make Joe dumb and take off his suit, and he gets himself exposed. Well, they poured the liquid, but they turned the camera so it looks like it's got a mind of its own to go towards the flesh. Really, really pretty quite clever. The liquid, of course, causes like a negative effect on people, and ultimately they're acting sporadically. They're behaving in all sorts of weird ways. Emotions are running wild. Those kinds of crazy things, and it creates even more havoc as the Enterprise is sort of like getting sucked into this area of the orbit that puts them at risk as this planet will self-destruct. So let's talk more about some of those details and get into it a little bit. Because as I said, I enjoyed this a lot more than I thought I would. So here's the shot that I was telling you about where they shoot it in a way that the liquid looks like it's running up at an angle. So obviously they shot it so it was flowing straight down towards the hand. I'd be shocked if that was even the actor's hand, either like a stand-in hand. I wouldn't even be surprised. I don't even care. So let's get to that. So there we go. Here we go. Here we go. Now I got it. So we get a little intro, we get a little seat, we get a little thing. They kind of basically have their little suits on or whatever. And then Joe, he gets himself exposed. Spock doesn't notice that. And then they go back to the scene where they're on board. They're going through their quote decontam, but they're not really because he's already being affected. And they're going through their examinations, things like that. They appear to be fine, but he's not really fine, right? So he's starting to have their different problems. I will say there's the way they do their lighting and stuff like that. I don't know what the norm was for other shows of this era, but one of the things I noticed about the sets is they do a really good job with adding a lot of shadows. And I don't know exactly how that was received for its time, but in hindsight, I think I like this. The show, I always thought of it as being a lot brighter and shinier, but this show is actually pretty dark and kind of edgy with how they approach their lighting and their set designs and stuff like that. Now, in hindsight, obviously with set design, I would add a lot more details on the tables and some of the things like that, but it wouldn't have cost that much money. They don't know why people are acting the way they are. They don't understand what happened on the planet, and then they sort of like have all these other different characters. So this is the confrontation scene that creates more contamination or infection, right? So Joe on the left is having this conversation with Riley and Sulu, and they're bickering over a sword and whatever. And basically Joe just starts losing it. He starts randomly talking about if men were meant to fly, they'd have wings, kind of thing, an anti-exploration lecture and things like that. So I don't know. I would think this show kind of predates a lot of that sort of like space conversation, but I would say there's a lot of people that were anti going to the moon and the space program and the amount of money that was being spent when things were very challenging and difficult during the 60s, because there wasn't really a lot of like value or sort of like benefit to the regular Joe for the amount of money and the exorbitant nature of the space program. So this actually on the surface seems like just a regular rant, but at the time probably was a pretty cutting edge thing that represented an interesting conversation. So I really, really did like that element in here. And then of course it's a butter knife, which made me laugh, but ultimately the struggle leads to the butter knife death. And here's the planet. And the funny part about the graphic is the extent of their graphic is to have this image and then they just roll it fast or doing whatever. That's literally the extent of their graphic. This is the quote autopsy, no masks, which made me laugh. And of course, Spock was fine, by the way, on the earlier shot. And then the exposure is sort of like they're just kind of like trying to figure out what's going on before Riley starts having his weird reaction to everything. And he goes like uber stereotypical Irish, I guess. Like we're gonna go some sort of weird folk song. He's gonna take over engineering. It's sort of like this really, he's driving them crazy by singing over the intercom. I was like, so I, I get why the episode gets mocked. Like this is literally silliness, and that's before you get to he flirts with one of the nurses, and that's when you before you get to shirtless Sulu, which is just it's just insane. I don't even know what to say about this shot. Like it's just yeah, okay. Like it literally is. It deserves to be mocked, but at the same time, the episode itself is way better. Anyway, so they grease him up, they make him all right, well, there you go. It is what it is. I don't know what to say. I was just like, wow. Okay, Walter, we got you. We got you, brother. Anyway, Hulu jumps in. She's doing a lot more in this episode, which I do love the fact that there's a lot more bickering and tension. No one knows what to do. She makes it to the brig, grabs over at one point. The shenanigans are just really strange in this episode at times. Anyway, so they're gonna try to break into engineering. You know, they do eventually get there. I will admit this took forever. I was a little bored in the sense of like this is just taking. Just get on with it. I know you're going to get in already. I didn't remember any of these details, so that's what's happening. They're cutting their way in. I don't know why he had to cut the weird trapezoid shape and not something different than that. Anyway, she's infected, and she's showing her love to Spock. And I love you, Spock. I'm hot for you, Spock. And then they get in, they get control, and then Spock basically has this sort of like crazy emotional sobbing and stuff like that starts happening. It is very much like a theatrical play for a moment. They let's turn Nimoy loose to just do emotions. I actually didn't think it was that bad. I actually kind of liked it. But some of the overacting and some of the other scenes are a little much. This was interesting shot. I don't understand why this shot of engineering. I don't know how much of a set space did they have for engineering because this doesn't seem like a shot that they have used to this point. So I'm curious to see if this shot will come back and we'll see more of this because this actually was very. That looks really. I mean, again, I would have more details on this wall, because clearly this is just a scrim back here. But they got this crazy wall thing that they rolled in, and it doesn't look that bad for its time. Looks not too bad. Anyway, so then in the meantime, McCoy has actually done the experimentation. He's come up with a cure, a vaccine, if you will. And he's done that. He's figured that cure out. And we still have like 10 minutes. So I was like, what happens in the next 10 minutes? And they basically just all contaminate each other. And the episode gets real wonky because Spock is dealing with his emotions, but Kirk is like, no, we have to come up with the equation to save the ship and do this with the formula and and it's like Spock's like, I'm gonna cry. I don't like you. I can't. I'm always guilty for thinking about you humans. But the formula is blah, blah, blah. I'm like, okay. It was weird how they were trying to deliver all of that, and yeah, didn't really work. But it wasn't. I mean, conceptually, it worked better than the execution, if that makes sense. And then you let Kirk overact it. Shatner's always really good at overacting. It is insane the overacting that they're going for with Kirk sometimes. Before you finally get to the final sequence scenario, it was so over the top with some of the stuff. Before you finally get to sort of a finale of it actually works, and then they kind of go backwards. So they basically accidentally, in execution to save the day, come up with a way to time warp and go back in time. And there's a quick little line at the end about, something we could do. And he's like, we might do that someday, Spock. We might do that someday. So that's kind of what the last few minutes are. It's a little tedious getting there, but I love his face. Nimoy is so good. I I cannot heap enough praise on how well he delivers this character. Like there's so much. I know it's not appropriate to call the Vulcan that has emotions, but look at the smugness that he conveys with this shot. It's just is really, really perfectly done. So anyway, um, it is definitely one of those that I can understand why people remember it because it is full of like some zany moments and some things like that that kind of memorable. But all in all, conceptually, not the worst thing in the world that people would pick up this virus and blah blah. The idea that it is somehow like being drunk, it takes away all your inhibitions and things like that. I thought that was a little silly and kind of beneath them. I would, I would just, I don't know why they just didn't have some sort of ambiguous mind amoeba that makes you act weird. I don't know. They didn't. They were trying to go for something and they didn't know what to do, and so they try to come up with some sort of weird backhanded social commentary that doesn't really work. But overall, it's still fun. I understand why the show has got such a great legacy because there are so many great things that you can kind of pick up on along the way. So anyway, I hope you're enjoying the Monday rewatches with me. Feel free to leave your comments and thoughts. We're going to be carrying on next week. I think is Charlie X. So we're doing that episode. I love hearing from you guys. Take care, everybody. I am Pops.